Hello friends, thank you for listening. We created this channel to bring a sense of structure and depth to the incredible world of storytelling. Here, we dive into fantasy, action, magic, and mayhem, exploring the thrilling realms of Chinese cultivation novels, Korean regressor revenge stories, and Japanese isekai adventures. If you love epic battles, mystical powers, legendary heroes, and gripping tales of destiny, this is the place for you. Join us as we unravel the best of fantasy fiction and bring you stories that transport you to new worlds. Subscribe now and become part of the adventure.
Regressor of the Fallen Family. Chapter 19. A month and a half of persistence. 1.5 months after tirelessly pushing the elderly dwarf, Hamar completed the work 2 weeks ahead of schedule, producing not only the ordered crossbows, but even a surplus of 100 extra pieces. Exhausted by his effort, he lay sprawled out, declaring a temporary strike. Of course, Logan received this news with satisfaction. The very next day, Logan immediately went to find the mercenary troop. The mercenaries, initially perplexed by the sight of the small crossbows, were left speechless after witnessing a demonstration. Wow, that's amazing. They shoot surprisingly far, and they can shoot rapidly. What an intriguing crossbow. But the general sentiment among the mercenaries was just that, casual appreciation. However, there was someone who recognized the weapon's true value at once. Whoa. Kai shuddered at the thought of his 300-strong cavalry armed with these repeating crossbows, envisioning the devastation they could bring upon the battlefield. This was a weapon that could endanger even those at a knight's level if not adequately prepared for. With that realization, Kai couldn't help but applaud. Impressive. This must be what you had in mind when you spoke of a crossbow-armed cavalry unit. The incongruity he had felt when he was asked to demand rigorous training for a unit that seemed to lack practical efficiency had now completely dissipated. And don't even think about trying to pry open the crossbow's cartridge or magazine. They're designed to break if forced, Logan instructed, ensuring their design remained secure. Of course, a weapon capable of such power must have complicated mechanics. Ironically, it was quite the opposite. The crossbow was surprisingly simple, hence the additional security measures. Sooner or later, the design will spread, but leaks can't be tolerated yet. And at least not until they overcame the upcoming territory wars and expanded their power. To this end, even the craftsmen enlisted to aid Hamar were only assigned to create parts in their own workshops, and there were no plans to produce more crossbows than the mercenary reserve. Just the mercenaries alone would suffice to overcome the territory wars. Even if more weapons were to be supplied, they would only extend to the level of the knight order. Of course, whether the knights will choose to use the crossbow is another matter, Logan mused with a half smile as he set limitations on who would receive the weapons. While providing all regular soldiers with the new weapons was impractical due to time and budget constraints, even if possible, the risk of information leakage was a greater concern. Once the mercenary training is complete, Logan's material preparations for the territory war would be nearly finished. Yes, nearly. Only the final phase remained. We'll need to verify its effectiveness. Pardon? Prepare the mercenaries, arm them with the crossbows, and prepare to march out. We'll clean out every monster we encounter up to the foot of the southern mountains. What? But that's... Does it seem impossible, even after what you've seen? While most monsters lurking below the mountain were low tier and not worth mentioning, perhaps it might be possible. It's not about possibility. We have to do it. Otherwise, there's no point. Kai, who didn't grasp Logan's intent, was met with silence instead of an explanation. Shortly after, "Let's go! Hing!" The mercenaries, armed with the new weapons, left through the gates to test their firepower. Do. As the mercenary troop charged across the plains with the rough sound of horse hooves, a horde of about 100 crawlers spotted them and scattered in fright. Just a few months prior, it took ages to clear out such a group of low-tier monsters. Kai, spotting the horde, shone with excitement, raised his fist high and then spread his palm wide. Simultaneously, the mercenaries, previously in 3 rows, dispersed horizontally. Fire! Shush. The arrows launched by the mercenaries, now in a 2-line formation, descended upon the fleeing crawlers with much less noise than the old crossbows. Kick! With just one volley, the majority of the crawler horde that reached about 100 had been decimated. The few lucky survivors soon fell as porcupines under the ensuing second barrage. Despite their numbers being a mere third of the mercenary force, they annihilated the swarm of monsters in barely 10 seconds. Even an encounter with a knight's order would have taken longer to resolve. Heartened by the outcome, the furthest back, Logan brightened noticeably. However, those most astounded were the mercenaries who wielded the weapons themselves. Almost no recoil. The range is farther than I thought too. Mine went through one creature and lodged in the head of a second. Yet their achievement wasn't over with that one instance. Under their persistent employer, the mercenaries swept through every subsequent monster horde they encountered as they galloped southward. Cries of monsters echoed across the fields, and eventually they started to recede like waves to avoid the mercenaries' approach. The group of 300 created a reverse monster wave that shook the wilderness of the McLean territories south. The heir's mercenaries, open the gates. What on earth are they doing at this hour? Right, the south is barren because of the monsters. There's not even a pioneering village. Shh, even the heir is with them. As the day gave way to twilight, the soldiers at the McLean outer wall hurried to open the gate for the returning mercenary troop, though they complained under their breath. Of course, with the territory's heir at the forefront, they dared not voice their gripes openly, but the sentiment was not lost on the mercenaries. Yet the mercenaries paid no mind to the soldiers' reactions. Ha, this thing. From now on, you're my prized possession number one. If you break it, the captain will break us. Handle with care. Like I would treat it any differently. They fondled their crossbows, faces dazed with bliss. While the hunt was only half a day's work and mainly against low-tier monsters with no valuable byproducts, these 300 had returned from a one-sided massacre of over 1,000 monsters. For ordinary C-rank mercenaries, to wield such power was unfathomable. Their excitement was justified. So the heir created this? Idiot. It was the dwarf. But that dwarf is the heir's slave. I heard he did the designs himself. Come on, that can't be right. Thanks to that, the peculiar and infamously rich employer, who had largely been regarded in a negative light, saw his reputation among the mercenaries soar. At the forefront, a middle-aged mercenary smiled proudly and turned to his employer. Are you satisfied? To some extent? Pardon? Kai, who had been thoroughly content, wore a puzzled look in response to Logan's less than enthusiastic reply. You're still stuck on old crossbow tactics. Why replace the rank after every shot? Wouldn't it be good to improve reload speed as well? Presented with a new list of demands, Kai made a reluctant face. With such firepower and he's still not content? What exactly does he plan to do? While the thought that he was merely indulging in a noble's eccentric hobby was long gone, Kai's skepticism surged at his employer's excessive ambition. Nonetheless, he did not voice his doubts. I shall readjust the training to match the new weapons. Good. I'll check again soon. Despite listing his grievances to Kai, Logan was actually quite pleased. The crossbows crafted by the dwarf Hamar were beyond his expectations, and the firepower demonstrated by the mercenaries already exceeded his initial estimates. Making more crossbows was unnecessary at this point, especially since calling soldiers to train with this new weapon amidst the looming threat of war was beyond consideration. The focus should be on my growth. If he could win the core knights of his house over in the process, all the better. Even amidst the positive progress, Logan could not completely shake off his worries and refocused his attention. Now, as the chill of winter came to a close, warm breezes heralded the arrival of a new season. The tales of the mad heir and the genius second son, which stirred controversy throughout the household, had quieted down, especially since the heir had stopped creating new issues. However, the opinion that the talented second son would eventually take over the territory started circulating publicly, though it was unclear where the rumors originated. Yet there was an exception. Within the knight circle, a different story unfolded. Wow, seriously, his stamina is unmatched. No kidding, such unreal physical abilities must be hereditary. It's a pity that with such monstrous stamina, he isn't more proficient with the sword. Then again, considering Dominant's case, that's hardly a reference, the old man's skills, but still, Arthur, even you lost to the second son before his awakening, and you saw it with your own eyes. It's truly strange. How can he be perfectly fit in just that one aspect? would have been something had he spent the time he uses for mischief on practicing the sword instead. There was still skepticism, but at least within the inner circle of the knights, no one spoke of the heir as mad anymore. For months he joined their training, displaying nothing but consistency. Furthermore, the punishing excise he initially crafted to dispel the heir, sprinting on horseback through the mountains, had now become a new symbol of the knight order. At first, it was a matter of pride that pushed them through this grueling exercise, but they found unexpected benefits beyond motivation for the junior knights. Speaking softly, Right, Ray, grow a bit more. It'll be over soon." Knight Henderson gently comforted his drowsy steed, a similar scene unfolding all around. Initially, the forced tranquilization led to chaos as horses woke amid training. But as they adapted, they grew more bonded with their riders, the knights. Knight, which in another sense means cavalryman. A horse is but another weapon that enhances a knight's combat prowess. Indeed, as the bond grew and communication flowed more freely, the knights' abilities improved, not just sentimentally. The higher-ranked knights employed force to empower their horses, increasing speed and endurance with mounted combat skills. The closer the bond with their horse, the more efficient the skills. Post-exercise, even the junior knights seemed to imitate this unconsciously through their strengthened connections, unwittingly training for higher proficiency. It's not all thanks to the heir. Heinkel gazed upon Logan with a newfound warmth like observing an unexpected blessing. It wasn't precisely the recognition Logan desired, but it was undoubtedly a positive shift. It may just work this time. Under the bright moon, seated cross-legged on his bed, anticipation gleamed in Logan's eyes. The hard regiment of the Night Order combined with the mental provocation of meditation bolstered each other, pushing him steadily forward. Every introspection brought a sensed growth in his force core. And recently, he felt stirrings of change whenever his core throbbed. Logan calmed his mind, recollecting the knowledge inscribed within, reminding himself, especially now, don't rush, don't fret. Nevertheless, the anticipation of advancing another step occasionally unsettled him, an unavoidable reaction given the circumstances. From the outset, this was natural since elevating personal strength was as crucial as the fate of the house itself, should he fulfill his aspirations. Assuming everything progressed as hoped, his newfound might would be the critical variable to sway an otherwise perilous future, those monsters. Logan recalled the superhumans of his former life, aura masters and archmages, who alone could turn the tide of battle. Among those he eventually had to overcome, such fiends were included. I must become stronger, surpass even the limits of my talent and efforts. Fortunately, he had knowledge of an arcane method, the sword of the spirit, and there remained time. With my next step in growth, even the odds of the territory war could shift. It was a pivotal moment even concerning the impending crisis. Contemplating the daunting future allowed him to regain his composure momentarily. Whispering the meditation incantation, Logan's mind focused inwards toward the force core within his heart. Physically, it might be invisible to the bare eye, but in Logan's consciousness, the force core felt larger than his body, especially today. Instinctively, he sensed the right moment had come. Flash! With his consciousness merging, a brilliant light burst from near his heart. A golden force core expelled a tiny secondary core, Regressor of the fallen family. Chapter 19. A month and a half of persistence. 1.5 months after tirelessly pushing the elderly dwarf, Hamar completed the work 2 weeks ahead of schedule, producing not only the ordered crossbows, but even a surplus of 100 extra pieces. Exhausted by his effort, he lay sprawled out, declaring a temporary strike. Of course, Logan received this news with satisfaction. The very next day, Logan immediately went to find the mercenary troop. The mercenaries, initially perplexed by the sight of the small crossbows, were left speechless after witnessing a demonstration. Wow, that's amazing. They shoot surprisingly far, and they can shoot rapidly. What an intriguing crossbow. But the general sentiment among the mercenaries was just that, casual appreciation. However, there was someone who recognized the weapon's true value at once. Whoa. Kai shuddered at the thought of his 300-strong cavalry armed with these repeating crossbows, envisioning the devastation they could bring upon the battlefield. This was a weapon that could endanger even those at a knight's level if not adequately prepared for. With that realization, Kai couldn't help but applaud. Impressive. This must be what you had in mind when you spoke of a crossbow-armed cavalry unit. The incongruity he had felt when he was asked to demand rigorous training for a unit that seemed to lack practical efficiency had now completely dissipated. And don't even think about trying to pry open the crossbow's cartridge or magazine. They're designed to break if forced, Logan instructed, ensuring their design remained secure. Of course, a weapon capable of such power must have complicated mechanics. Ironically, it was quite the opposite. The crossbow was surprisingly simple, hence the additional security measures. Sooner or later, the design will spread, but leaks can't be tolerated yet. And at least not until they overcame the upcoming territory wars and expanded their power. To this end, even the craftsmen enlisted to aid Hamar were only assigned to create parts in their own workshops, and there were no plans to produce more crossbows than the mercenary reserve. Just the mercenaries alone would suffice to overcome the territory wars. Even if more weapons were to be supplied, they would only extend to the level of the Knight Order. Of course, whether the Knights will choose to use the crossbow is another matter, Logan mused with a half smile as he set limitations on who would receive the weapons. While providing all regular soldiers with the new weapons was impractical due to time and budget constraints, even if possible, the risk of information leakage was a greater concern. Once the mercenary training is complete, Logan's material preparations for the territory war would be nearly finished. Yes, nearly. Only the final phase remained. We'll need to verify its effectiveness. Pardon? Prepare the mercenaries, arm them with the crossbows, and prepare to march out. We'll clean out every monster we encounter up to the foot of the southern mountains. What? But that's... Does it seem impossible, even after what you've seen? While most monsters lurking below the mountain were low tier and not worth mentioning, perhaps it might be possible. It's not about possibility. We have to do it. Otherwise, there's no point. Kai, who didn't grasp Logan's intent, was met with silence instead of an explanation. Shortly after, "Let's go! Hing!" The mercenaries, armed with the new weapons, left through the gates to test their firepower. Do. As the mercenary troop charged across the plains with the rough sound of horse hooves, a horde of about 100 crawlers spotted them and scattered in fright. Just a few months prior, it took ages to clear out such a group of low-tier monsters. Kai, spotting the horde, shone with excitement, raised his fist high and then spread his palm wide. Simultaneously, the mercenaries, previously in 3 rows, dispersed horizontally. Fire! Shush. The arrows launched by the mercenaries, now in a 2-line formation, descended upon the fleeing crawlers with much less noise than the old crossbows. Kick! With just 1 volley, the majority of the crawler horde that reached about 100 had been decimated. The few lucky survivors soon fell as porcupines under the ensuing second barrage. Despite their numbers being a mere third of the mercenary force, they annihilated the swarm of monsters in barely 10 seconds. Even an encounter with a knight's order would have taken longer to resolve. Heartened by the outcome, the furthest back, Logan brightened noticeably. However, those most astounded were the mercenaries who wielded the weapons themselves. Almost no recoil. The range is farther than I thought too. Mine went through 1 creature and lodged in the head of a second. Yet their achievement wasn't over with that one instance. Under their persistent employer, the mercenaries swept through every subsequent monster horde they encountered as they galloped southward. Cries of monsters echoed across the fields, and eventually they started to recede like waves to avoid the mercenaries' approach. The group of 300 created a reverse monster wave that shook the wilderness of the McLean territories south. The heir's mercenaries, open the gates. What on earth are they doing at this hour? Right, the south is barren because of the monsters. There's not even a pioneering village. Shh, even the air is with them. As the day gave way to twilight, the soldiers at the McLean outer wall hurried to open the gate for the returning mercenary troop, though they complained under their breath. Of course, with the territory's heir at the forefront, they dared not voice their gripes openly, but the sentiment was not lost on the mercenaries. Yet the mercenaries paid no mind to the soldiers' reactions. Ha, this thing. From now on, you're my prized possession number 1. If you break it, the captain will break us. Handle with care. Like I would treat it any differently. They fondled their crossbows, faces dazed with bliss. While the hunt was only half a day's work and mainly against low-tier monsters with no valuable byproducts, These 300 had returned from a one-sided massacre of over 1,000 monsters. For ordinary C-rank mercenaries, to wield such power was unfathomable. Their excitement was justified. So the heir created this? Idiot. It was the dwarf. But that dwarf is the heir's slave. I heard he did the designs himself. Come on, that can't be right. Thanks to that, the peculiar and infamously rich employer, who had largely been regarded in a negative light, saw his reputation among the mercenaries soar. At the forefront, a middle-aged mercenary smiled proudly and turned to his employer. Are you satisfied? To some extent? Pardon? Kai, who had been thoroughly content, wore a puzzled look in response to Logan's less than enthusiastic reply. You're still stuck on old crossbow tactics. Why replace the rank after every shot? Wouldn't it be good to improve reload speed as well? Presented with a new list of demands, Kai made a reluctant face. With such firepower and he's still not content? What exactly does he plan to do? While the thought that he was merely indulging in a noble's eccentric hobby was long gone, Kai's skepticism surged at his employer's excessive ambition. Nonetheless, he did not voice his doubts. I shall readjust the training to match the new weapons. Good. I'll check again soon. Despite listing his grievances to Kai, Logan was actually quite pleased. The crossbows crafted by the dwarf Hamar were beyond his expectations, and the firepower demonstrated by the mercenaries already exceeded his initial estimates. Making more crossbows was unnecessary at this point, especially since calling soldiers to train with this new weapon amidst the looming threat of war was beyond consideration. The focus should be on my growth. If he could win the core knights of his house over in the process, all the better. Even amidst the positive progress, Logan could not completely shake off his worries and refocused his attention. Now, as the chill of winter came to a close, warm breezes heralded the arrival of a new season. The tales of the mad heir and the genius second son, which stirred controversy throughout the household, had quieted down, especially since the heir had stopped creating new issues. However, the opinion that the talented second son would eventually take over the territory started circulating publicly, though it was unclear where the rumors originated. Yet there was an exception. Within the knight circle, a different story unfolded. Wow, seriously, his stamina is unmatched. No kidding, such unreal physical abilities must be hereditary. It's a pity that with such monstrous stamina, he isn't more proficient with the sword. Then again, considering Dominant's case, that's hardly a reference, the old man's skills. But still, Arthur, even you lost to the second son before his awakening, and you saw it with your own eyes. It's truly strange. How can he be perfectly fit in just that one aspect? Would have been something had he spent the time he uses for mischief on practicing the sword instead. There was still skepticism, but at least within the inner circle of the knights, no one spoke of the heir as mad anymore. For months he joined their training, displaying nothing but consistency. Furthermore, the punishing excise he initially crafted to dispel the heir, sprinting on horseback through the mountains, had now become a new symbol of the knight order. At first it was a matter of pride that pushed them through this grueling exercise, but they found unexpected benefits beyond motivation for the junior knights. Speaking softly, Right, Ray, grow a bit more. It'll be over soon. Knight Henderson gently comforted his drowsy steed, a similar scene unfolding all around. Initially, the forced tranquilization led to chaos as horses woke amid training. But as they adapted, they grew more bonded with their riders, the knights. Knight, which in another sense means cavalryman. A horse is but another weapon that enhances a knight's combat prowess. Indeed, as the bond grew and communication flowed more freely, the knights' abilities improved, not just sentimentally. The higher-ranked knights employed force to empower their horses, increasing speed and endurance with mounted combat skills. The closer the bond with their horse, the more efficient the skills. Post-exercise, even the junior knights seemed to imitate this unconsciously through their strengthened connections, unwittingly training for higher proficiency. It's not all thanks to the heir. Heinkel gazed upon Logan with a newfound warmth like observing an unexpected blessing. It wasn't precisely the recognition Logan desired, but it was undoubtedly a positive shift. It may just work this time. Under the bright moon, seated cross-legged on his bed, anticipation gleamed in Logan's eyes. The hard regiment of the Knight Order combined with the mental provocation of meditation bolstered each other, pushing him steadily forward. Every introspection brought a sensed growth in his force core. And recently, he felt stirrings of change whenever his core throbbed. Logan calmed his mind, recollecting the knowledge inscribed within, reminding himself, especially now, don't rush, don't fret. Nevertheless, the anticipation of advancing another step occasionally unsettled him, an unavoidable reaction given the circumstances. From the outset, this was natural since elevating personal strength was as crucial as the fate of the house itself, should he fulfill his aspirations. Assuming everything progressed as hoped, his newfound might would be the critical variable to sway an otherwise perilous future, those monsters. Logan recalled the superhumans of his former life, aura masters and archmages, who alone could turn the tide of battle. Among those he eventually had to overcome, such fiends were included. I must become stronger, surpass even the limits of my talent and efforts. Fortunately, he had knowledge of an arcane method, the sword of the spirit, and there remained time. With my next step in growth, even the odds of the territory war could shift. It was a pivotal moment even concerning the impending crisis. Contemplating the daunting future allowed him to regain his composure momentarily. Whispering the meditation incantation, Logan's mind focused inwards toward the force core within his heart. Physically, it might be invisible to the bare eye, but in Logan's consciousness, the force core felt larger than his body, especially today. Instinctively, he sensed the right moment had come. Flash! With his consciousness merging, a brilliant light burst from near his heart. A golden force core expelled a tiny secondary core. Regressor of the Fallen Family, Chapter 20. Logan's growth and betrayal. At that moment, Logan could feel that he had advanced to a new level. A second core, revolving around the one he already possessed, had formed. He immediately knew that the two cores were intricately connected more than anything else. The force that used to flow directly from the core to his body was now amplified twofold in an instant as it passed through the second core. Wong, the sudden surge of power nearly made his body tremble. Moreover, he could sense that the quality of the force had grown as well. It had become stickier and denser, giving him confidence in its efficiency beyond a mere quantitative increase. Additionally, achieving a dual core signified that he was ready to learn the next secret technique of his martial heritage, Iron Splitter. Just thinking about the power of the first technique, he was certain that the second would far exceed his expectations. If he could master that technique before the war, even high-grade knights would pose no fear to him. His elated consciousness naturally brought the secret techniques to his mind, and from then on, his research, which lasted until dawn's light greeted his closed eyes, did not cease. As expected, it's not easy. Despite the disappointment in his words, Logan's expression was not too dark. It had taken 3 months to master the wave splitter, the first technique. With patient effort, mastering the second before the war seemed entirely possible. Just as Logan was contentedly enjoying the new morning sunlight, someone knocked on his door before he fully relished the quiet. "Come in. My lord, did you sleep well last night?" The one who entered with a snicker was Rick. Whenever Logan saw that face with such a smile, he knew. There's a problem again, isn't there? A problem? If that were the case, I wouldn't be smiling, right? You only have that expression when there's a problem for me, but something fun for you. Ha ha, my lord is joking. So, nothing serious then? I'm off to training. The family head has requested your presence for a meal. The whole family. Logan was about to head for the door when Rick shouted abruptly, making him grab the boy's cheek mercilessly. "Hey, Trouble. What trickery is this?" It really hurts. What's so troublesome about having a meal with the family? It's the first time since you ran away. That's only in a typical family relation. We always had breakfast together until a few years ago. Oh, now that he thought about it, that did seem true. That's right. There were times like that. Distracted by memories flashing through his mind, Rick didn't give him a moment to get sentimental. Hurry up, they're waiting for you. If you were training, interrupt. If you were sleeping, wake up anyway. Now? Why? What are you talking about? Today is your birthday, and the 20th at that. What? You should hurry. Sighing deeply, Logan exhaled a breath. Among the noblaic families of the Empire, Some celebrated the coming of age with lavish parties, but this practice was far removed from the Grandia Kingdom's MacLean family. It was customary for the occasionally separated family members to gather and celebrate over a meal. To Logan, however, even this small tradition was nothing but a nuisance. I should be able to ignore such minor customs. Thinking from the perspective of the birthday person himself, it was an absurd notion, but given the current mood, anyone could understand. Discounting the greetings to his father and stepmother before the meal. You're of age now. Yes. This was essentially the only conversation during the meal. I'll just eat quickly and leave. With that thought, Logan swallowed the dessert on his plate in one gulp. I have eaten well. Then I... Sit down. Yes. But even leaving this uncomfortable place was not up to him. Watching Logan's annoyed expression, Patrick, who also finished his dessert in one go, opened his mouth. Logan, you are the heir to the MacLean family. What's he trying to say? With an uneasy premonition, Logan's eyebrows twitched, and, as expected, a rather unpleasant topic arose. According to tradition, we should discuss the family inheritance on the day of your coming of age. Dear. However, calming his surprised wife with a gesture, Patrick continued his words. The actions you've taken up to now have mostly been unsuitable for an heir to our family. With that statement, color returned to Marianne's face, but Patrick was not finished speaking. However, I've heard from the knights recently that you've shown a considerable change. As I promised earlier, I will give you a 1-year grace period. After that, your position in the family will be based on the behavior you show. Dear, that's... Let it be. I'm not saying I won't give Runyon a chance. Though she had more to say, Marianne's face turned red and white as she refrained from speaking further. Runyon simply forced himself to swallow his food. Whether it was meat or rubber, he wasn't sure. In the midst of this suffocating situation, Logan dropped a bombshell. Why wait for a year? Just give the heir position to Runyon. I'm not interested. Unbeknownst to others, the family crisis was ongoing. Even if they survived this immediate crisis, another dire one was expected within a decade. There's no guarantee of survival focusing on that alone. I don't have time for an heir issue. Firm in his resolve, Logan spoke again. Runyon, with his natural talent for martial arts, fits better as the heir to a knightly family. Though it was partly an excuse, it was also part of his sincerity. But the father's thoughts seemed to differ. His brow furrowed, his lips quivered, and soon his face reddened as he burst into a bellow. The heir to the MacLean family. Does this proud position look frivolous to you? Who are you to decide who gives and takes? The resounding shout filled the mansion. His father, Patrick MacLean, seemed as if he had received an unprecedented insult as he glared fiercely at his eldest son. At that unexpectedly tense moment, everyone froze until... Bang! Crash. My lord, Marquis of Teslon has declared war. An unforeseen variable shattered the icy atmosphere in an instant. We bear a grudge against the MacLean family for the unjust death of our ancestor Kyle Teslon. Out of nowhere, a magical communication had thrown the MacLean family into chaos. A state of emergency was declared, and a family council was convened. It was an issue that dated back 60 years, to the time when the MacLean family began to fall. No one understood why this grudge from the past had suddenly resurfaced, whether to investigate the cause or to send emissaries, but it was decided to determine a course of action in a grand assembly. As everyone was taken aback, Logan, too, was perturbed for a different reason. Why so early? The event had occurred almost 2 months earlier than his previous life's memories. I thought there would be more time. Though he had no idea what had brought on this situation earlier than expected, he didn't have time just to worry. My lord, it's time for the meeting. I know. Had he had a bit more time to master the second form of the divine sword, he would have been more confident, but even now, he was not overly anxious. Winning is all that matters whenever it may be. The power is enough as it is. The unexpected variable had arisen, but his confidence, built over careful preparation, remained unshaken. However, others had different thoughts. The Teslan Marquisate has an army of knights that outnumbers our own by half. Even with our family head's presence, the odds are. Their potential regular forces exceed 1,000 men, more than double our resources. We must seek a truce. With both knights and common soldiers vastly outnumbering them, the McLean family was at an objective disadvantage. Thus, the conference hall inevitably became chaotic. If tradition is followed, they will set out 1 week after the declaration of war. The distance from the enemy's fortress to ours is 3 days' march. We have fewer soldiers, so a defensive strategy should be. First, issue a conscription decree. Gather as much force as possible, set up defenses, patrol. No, we must send emissaries first. Amidst the chaos, not typical of Noblaic meetings, the chamber was filled with uproar. With a scowl, Patrick, who was watching this confusion, suddenly stomped his foot. Bang! Silence, everyone! His thunderous voice silenced the noisy assembly. Even if the royal authority isn't as it used to be, these people have declared war without royal permission. This is clearly a deliberate act. To those who are speaking of truce, do you really think before speaking? His stern look swept across the chamber, and those who had been voicing opinions of sending emissaries and seeking peace all shut their mouths. With a stern rebuke, the lord who steered the family's opinion toward war continued to shout, "Everyone prepare for war, and speak of strategies for victory. All other opinions will not be tolerated." Abruptly defined in direction, the vassals' opinions quickly organized. Conscription will take place over 3 days. The soldiers' weapons and armor, knights' training. As preparations and organization for war were set in motion, opinions concerning Logan began to surface. Will the young lords join the battle? It was obvious for the force-using brothers. Now that I think about it, the eldest son trains with the knights. Will the young lords join the knightly ranks? It was the McLean family, long descended from knights, though now fallen. For them, it was only natural for the family's direct descendants, now of age, to participate in combat. At that suggestion, Patrick nodded without hesitation. My sons will also join the battle, especially Logan, who has come of age, should fulfill a role befitting him. Logan didn't object, and so his deployment was confirmed. However, there was a bit of an issue with his role. I heard your mercenaries are training for cavalry, is that correct? That's right. A well-trained cavalry can be considered the equivalent of at least 3 infantrymen. Can your mercenaries take on that role? Absolutely. At Dwayne's words, Logan responded with a confident smile. However, very few truly believed him. At least it's better than nothing. Perhaps the young lord's toy soldiers might actually be useful. Doubtful. They're just lowly mercenaries. They'll probably run at the first sign of trouble. The disparagement towards Logan extended to his mercenaries, and those who had never seen their training denounced them with unanimously negative opinions. Logan steadfastly presented his argument without wavering. Father, my mercenaries will not just replace 3 infantrymen, but 10. We have been training in unison for several months, so please allow us to operate as a separate detachment. Are you saying you won't follow the family's command? It would be more helpful to the overall military power if we act separately. That's fine. Permission granted. The approval came too easily, probably because the mercenaries were not considered a substantial military asset. For whatever reason, it was good news for Logan. Thank you. Still, not everything went according to plan. However, you will assign someone else to command them. You will join the knights. Excuse me?
Regressor of the Fallen Family, Chapter 21. Can it be that there's no one fit to command the mercenary troop? We do have someone, but since I created the mercenaries, I should be the one. You are the firstborn of our family. Do you really desire to join the lower mercenaries on the battlefield and claim some feats for the enemy? The majority of those listening nodded in agreement with the head of the family's scolding. It was clear what they thought of the mercenaries, but Logan remained unyielded. My role in the Order of Knights is not significant. It would be better for the overall war effort if I moved separately with the mercenaries. What? Logan had initially planned to operate with his mercenaries during the territorial war. With the repeating crossbow perfected and plans to join the order only as a last resort no longer necessary, He continued his participation in the Order's training for personal growth and future plans beyond the territorial war. After all, my father commands the Order. It's better for me to move with the mercenaries. At least they'd pretend to die if I told them to. Logan's decision was logical from his perspective, but naturally Patrick did not agree. Have you considered the negative impact it would have on our allies if you were to be captured or killed while moving with the mercenaries? That won't happen. Is this some kind of child's play to you? Do you think the lowly mercenaries you trained are an invincible force? Or are you too foolish to distinguish between reality and fantasy? His last words were laced with tangible anger. Patrick saw his son as naive, unable to grasp reality in an emergency, pushing only his own arguments. Yet what would truly test his patience was yet to come. I am neither foolish nor ignorant of reality. I am merely seeking the place where I can exert my greatest strength. Is that with your petty troop of soldiers? My mercenaries are not playing at war. We will prove our worth in this war and earn our merits. Logan's eyes did not waver, but Patrick saw it as nothing more than a tantrum, fueling his anger further. If that's how you intend to proceed, from now on, I will not think of you as my son. Even if you are captured or die in battle, you will be treated as unrelated to our family. Are you okay with that? Patrick's extreme words shocked the retainers present. Yet, the Grand Duke's response was more surprising. That is fine with me. Must you really turn my insides out in such grave times? What are you thinking? Do you think everything will go your way? Are you so thoughtless? Patrick's fury erupted, his red-faced outcry pouring over Logan. Go on. Do as you please. But remember this, in this war, you are not to expect treatment as a direct family member. I will earn our merits. Unbelievable. Perhaps due to the crisis, Patrick could not control his emotions any more than usual. Unfortunately, unsettling Patrick was not solely Logan's doing. Master. Emergency! A servant barged in amid the family council. It seemed impossible there could be anything more urgent than the war situation. But the news he brought was indeed startling. The Krols family has informed us they will not send military support. They mentioned timing and financial liquidity, but at those words, all eyes turned to Marianne. She stammered, trying to make an excuse. There must be some sort of mistake. That can't be true. Her voice rose with disbelief, yet the servant confirmed firmly. Sir Dwayne says it's a matter repeatedly confirmed. Marianne's face went pale. I will verify it myself. As she rose from her seat to leave hastily, a familiar bulky figure entered with a somber face, confirming the news. There's no need, lady. The Krols family's official refusal stands. They have also declared they will cut off financial support to our family, effective today. Dwayne's words brought shock, met with silence rather than discussion of the grave financial implications. The most pressing issue was the immediate absence of support troops, throwing the council into disarray. No! Can't be! Mother, calm down. There must be some mistake. It's a misunderstanding. Mother! As Marianne rushed out, Ranyan bit his lip and slumped into his seat. Logan approached his disheartened brother and patted his shoulder. It'll be okay. Everything will work out. Brother! Ranyan couldn't help but bow his head further, thinking his brother's hopeful words were mere bravado amidst their desperate situation. The shock from the Krols family's withdrawal was profound. Other retainers muttered in confusion, unsure of how to proceed, simply watching the red-faced head of the family for cues. Only one remained calm and collected. So, it's come to this, as expected. Logan knew from his past life that the Krols family had refused to assist during the territorial war. Whether there was a more significant reason or it was merely a line drawn, considering the estrangement that persisted even after Ranyan rose to prominence as an aura user, meant the ties were likely irreparable. To Logan, however, it was all irrelevant. With this, my stepmother won't be able to wield the same influence as before. If we win the territorial war, there will be no more obstacles within the family. It was as if a troublesome hindrance had been cleared. Logan countlessly stepped forward. I shall go ahead and prepare. If there are further instructions, please contact me. His departure echoed hollowly, met with no response, but Logan's stride was decisive. War, you say? Yes. You don't seem surprised. Had there been no war, I would have desired to start one. What horrendous words. To have a weapon and wish to use it is a natural human desire. The mercenaries laughed heartily at Kai's words. Though accustomed to war, their confidence seemed excessive. But rightfully so. The monster horde that invaded the McLean's estate last winter numbered only a tenth of the previous years. Inside, it was dismissed as an anomaly, but Logan knew better. Last winter's monster horde was unprecedented. Most had been slaughtered by a mere 300 mercenaries. Their self-assurance wasn't arrogance, but confidence born from solid evidence. Let's sweep away the enemies. Yes. Amidst the unease within the McLean family over the unexpected war, only 314 people were confident of victory. The war began countier than the McLean family anticipated. Teslon's forces have appeared at the western border. Sir Hamon Teslon has been confirmed in the rear. Those scoundrels disregarding all conventions. Only a day had passed since the declaration of war. Teslon's forces had already been sighted in McLean territory. Given that their main force would have left the Teslon hold fast, they must have set out the moment war was declared. And the enemy's numbers were staggering. There are over 100 knights. Regular forces appear to number over 1,000. Add to that around 10,000 drafted soldiers. It's a total war commitment. What? Has that Hamon gone mad? As the shocking reports flooded in, Patrick's outrage erupted. This wasn't an international conflict, but a domestic territorial war. Initiating a total war scenario with draftees from the attacking side was unheard of. Even more so, knights, almost superhuman to the average person, constituted the primary combat force of the era. Though numerous, draftees could only turn the tide of battle or slow down a defeat. Hamon Teslon must be out of his mind to want that. Even from Logan's knowledge of the true cause of the war, this was astounding, sending the McLean family into disarray. Crazy bastards, drafting 10,000? Have they squeezed out their own territory? Over 100 knights? When did they manage to? From a few dozen knights they knew of, the enemy's lead force had swelled. That maniac Hamon has staked the fate of his territory. Patrick ground his teeth. How is our status? The order of knights 53 men ready. Regular forces 5152 men ready. Draftees will need about a day more. Logan's mercenary troop 314 men ready. Ignoring his eldest son's discouraging report, Patrick frowned. Why? Even as proud as he was, Patrick knew his estate was no significant prize. Wrapped in his thoughts amidst the enemy fast approaching, the reasoning behind it all felt irrelevant. Get a grip, Patrick McLean. Focus on what needs to be done. He encouraged himself, straightening his posture. A noble house may have declined to a mere barony, but he was still a ruler. He could not afford to show weakness or falter. Summon all men capable of bearing arms. We'll meet them with full force. Yes. We march as soon as the troops are assembled. We'll pulverize them daring to trespass on our front lawn. Even at maximum mobilization, McLean's forces barely numbered 5,000. Excluding draftees, the knights and regular forces differed by a factor of 2. The disparity was dire. Under such conditions, Patrick ordered an open field battle rather than a defensive one. Yet his retainers offered no objections. It's as before. Logan grimaced, listening to his father's orders. Despite the disadvantage in numbers, the choice for an open field battle was inevitable. At the time, knights, comprised of higher-level force users, represented the primary military might. A group of such superhumans, well-armed and formed into a phalanx, were nigh unstoppable to anyone but equals in strength. McLean's robust yet magicless walls stood no chance against such numbers of knights. It was better to focus on a frontal engagement than face an unfavorable melee after a breach. Moreover, the McLean family had a particular ace up their sleeve, namely the superior knight Patrick McLean himself. Few knights reached such a peak, and he was one of them. Even middling force users, middling knights, could be considered the elite of a typical order. A superior knight could take on over 10 such elite fighters. Thus, with their superior knight as head, the retainers believed they could at least match the Teslon knights despite being only half their number. Territorial wars end either with the surrender or death of the ruling lord. If Patrick, a superior knight, could capture or kill Hamon Teslon, the conflict would conclude. And that's what they must be thinking. In a war between border territories where power clashed, it wasn't entirely absurd to rely on simple tactics. If I hadn't known the family would fall. But this life was different from the past. Logan and his mercenary troop were present. I will change the outcome. I must. While everyone else was busy, Logan clenched his fist, his eyes shining with resolve. Chapter 22. Into battle. Boom. As the long trumpet call rippled through the air, The gates opened and the armored cavalry, led by the knights of the MacLean family, charged forth from the castle. 53 knights. Over 550 cavalrymen, not drafted soldiers but regulars and apprentice knights, and nearly 5,000 draftees. In total, an army exceeding 5,000 in number. 3 days after the declaration of war, the MacLean territory had summoned a force beyond its limits. Among the conscripts, there were even young lads whose cheeks were still downy with soft fuzz. Moreover, a quarter of the draftees lacked proper equipment, brandishing spears and clad in hastily assembled wooden armor. It was no exaggeration to say they had merely filled a quota. We have no choice. If the invaders wager their fate, we too must mobilize everything we have. Patrick tried to justify the excessive drafting and forced his gaze upwards to the sky. Riding a giant black steed, much larger than the average warhorse, and clad in a helmet with a red plume, he was at the very front, waving his hand. Wah! The people of the territory cheered at the sight, but underneath the forced cheers, their expressions were filled with anxiety. The enemy? They have entered within a day's journey. We'll encounter them by half a day then. Yes. Tension laced the conversation between Patrick and Heinkel. Despite their inner unrest, their faces were calm as they looked back at the territory's people. It was a feigned front to assuage the troops and the people's anxiety. However, that calm facade dissipated not long after they left the gate. Where did Logan go? He left at dawn with the mercenaries. Why? I'm not quite sure. What? Patrick's face contorted at Heinkel's reply. Why didn't you stop him? Command over the mercenaries falls under the young lord, and he showed some diligence lately, is that it? You've gotten lax, Heinkel. My apologies. As Heinkel hurriedly bowed his head, Patrick sighed deeply. Sigh. People don't change easily after all. Heinkel looked puzzled at the sudden lament, but Patrick wasn't blaming him. Seems like I placed false hope in Logan. Likely he's fled. Exclude him from the forces. Patrick's resolute tone made Heinkel lift his head. Despite a short time, the young lord he trained with didn't seem like someone who would flee. But before he could say anything, someone next to Patrick erupted. That's impossible. The boy, barely older than his own gear, objected vehemently, his eyes blazing red. My brother would never do that. Ronyan recalled the image of his brother who visited him during training not long ago. Not yet, not yet. You still can't control it. Pondering over his brother's disappointed sigh, his brother had demonstrated an astonishing skill, even to the inexperienced Ronyan. A secret technique shown by none other, not even their father. I will teach you soon as well. Let's save our family together. Ever since, it had been clear his brother sensed a looming bad atmosphere. Such a brother wouldn't abandon his family and flee. My brother was already anticipating the war. There's no way he would. Ronyan, as if fighting his own battle, raised his voice to defend Logan, but Patrick's expression only twisted further at the sight of his youngest. Ronyan, stop defending Logan. The fact remains he is not here. No, that can't be. My brother wouldn't just run away. Ronyan's big voice filled the area, stirring more murmurs. Did the young lord desert? So the rumor was true? The lord's son? Whispers buzzed. As the soldier's mood soured, Patrick bellowed at Ronyan. Regardless, he is not here now. He has missed the battle upon which our family's fate hangs. If that is not desertion, then what is? Unable to rebut, Ronyan hardened his face in frustration. Patrick looked at him and spoke in an icy tone. Nobility must fulfill their duties to be true nobles. One who shirks their fundamental obligations deserves not the privileges of nobility. The basic duty of nobility was to protect their people from external threats. For the knightly MacLean house, it was of paramount importance. Patrick grasped Ronyan's shoulder as he declared, You must now fulfill your brother's role as well. Do not waver. Meeting his father's fierce eyes, Ronyan could only nod weakly. Patrick turned away with a sigh, his heart heavy. It wasn't pleasant to treat his own son as if he were nothing. But the rapidly plummeting morale of the soldiers, evident as they whispered amongst themselves, made any such feelings a luxury. Maybe I should have expelled him then. He regretted giving credence to obedience that was perhaps feigned. Even with the memory of his late wife haunting him, he should have been harsher. Then, before this gloomy war, perhaps the soldiers' spirits would have been higher. No, Patrick shook his head, throwing away the weak thought. A knight on the eve of war has no business indulging in such sentiments. Clenching his jaw, the bitter taste of blood sharpened his mind. Yes, His own actions, the strength of his forces, none of that mattered now. We must win. That was his greatest purpose in life, to protect the family. The resolve became fighting spirit, elevating Patrick's aura inexorably higher, bleeding from his bitten lip as he resolved for victory. The Lord. We will win. We must. His energy and willpower radiated outwards. Yes! Sensing the shift in the air, Patrick hollered with conviction. Advance at full speed. Boom, boom, boom. The enemy moved in perfect unity to the resonating drum beats. Just the sight of their vast numbers, in better formation than the Allies, demoralized Patrick's soldiers. Moreover, the young lord deserted, they say. Shh! Careful, such words can cause trouble. It's just a rumor. What rumor? Just look. Can you see that redhead anywhere? Unintentionally, another rumor regarding Logan gnawed at the soldier's courage. Still, there were those who didn't believe it, who defiantly rebutted. Shut it! Our lord would never do such a thing. What's with him? That's the rogue's attendant. Why's a noble's attendant here? We all need to lend a hand. Can't you see the difference in our strength? Amidst Patrick's impassioned cries, the morale of their troops continued to drop rapidly. Why must we? Can we even win? No, can we survive? An anxious murmur spread virus-like when Patrick unsheathed his sword and bellowed with the force of thunder, "Do not fear! Victory is ours!" At once, the knights lifted their blades, and a keen aura burst forth around the knightly orders. Especially the higher-ranked knights like Patrick, exuding strength visible enough that it could be seen affecting the surroundings. Their intangible power soothed the fearful soldiers, instilling an unseen courage. Soon after, chants thundered from various points within the McLean lines. Wah! Their cries rivaled the enemy's fervor, uplifting each other. The previous unease was visibly reduced. This should be fine. Patrick had boosted the Allies' morale by flaunting his own strength, and the fact that the enemy did not respond, even seeing that, was a hopeful sign. Surely they have no higher-ranking knights. Patrick comforted himself as he kept a watchful eye on the enemies. Before long, the opposing armies converged not even 1 kilometer apart. I'll cut down Baron McLean and avenge my great-grandfather's grudge. Let the descendants of sinners extend their necks and meet my blade. Blonde, middle-aged Hamar Teslan strode forward in the enemy ranks, his sword brandished high with bravado. Patrick stepped forward from the McLean lines in response. Good! I'll accept that blade. Let's test our mettle, knight against knight. His voice resonated across the plains, filled with vigor and confidence, further boosting the Allies' morale. Unlike Patrick, who stepped out alone, Hamar Teslan went deeper into their lines. Soon, 100 armored knights spurred forth to the front of the formation. My knights are my blade! Let's see you take them on, Patrick McLean! Hamar Teslan's voice echoed from the rear, and Patrick smirked in return. Don't have the guts to face me alone. How shamefully you hide brings heat to my face. Laughter erupted throughout McLean ranks at the call. As morale soared, Patrick wasted no time in again raising his voice. Let's smash those flunkies of a cowardly lord. His sword pointed toward the enemy. Charge! And thus the war began. We break the vanguard! Patrick, leading the front, spurred his horse forward ferociously. With their forces at an absolute numerical disadvantage, his role was crucial. He had to break through the vanguard, disrupting the enemy knights to have any chance of victory. Thus, he poured all his strength into that first lance charge, determined to utterly crush at least 2 or 3 knights. The power of his steed enhanced through the force, his lance, increasingly radiant with red energy. Thud, thud, thud! The enemy encampment fast approached, fully armored knights and their vanguard locking eyes with Patrick. Huh? Shields? Whether the primary weapon was a spear, the base of any charge was the lance. Nothing was better suited for focusing destructive power into a single point through sheer acceleration. Of course, there was no reason to stick to a lance if one could wield another weapon effectively. But Patrick had not expected the vanguard to meet his lance with a shield raised. To think you can withstand my charge? How dare! Rage surged, amplifying Patrick's fighting spirit. Whoom! He intended to obliterate the knight and pierce the ones following. Boom! The battlefield erupted with a deafening noise. Yet the outcome was far from what Patrick anticipated. Gah! Wincing from the pain in his wrist, Patrick pulled back his horse. The impact was diffused in all directions by his superior force control, but a sharp pain spread through his lance arm, the shock reaching his mount. Though he minimized the impact, had it been any stronger, his stout horse's legs would have buckled. The adversary wasn't unscathed either. The rival horse couldn't withstand the shock and collapsed, the leading knight bleeding beneath his helm. Surely the wounds were not light, but the shock was evident on Patrick's face. He blocked it? A self-satisfied smile was evident on the mouth of the now grounded knight, despite the streaming blood. Coup. You live up to your reputation, Baron. To be in this state despite being so prepared. The knight's insolence stirred Patrick's ire further. He couldn't afford to be hobbled here. Damn it! Pair up and take him down! Crush them all! Do you think they can? The halted advance of the McLean knights, now outnumbered 2-1, began to show as they were pushed back by the enemy's knights. This can't be. We can't let this happen. He envisioned the adverse future unfolding before his eyes. If he was held back, and consequently the knightly order stalled, the already outnumbered main forces would be easily crushed by the enemy cavalry. Even with the knightly order as their core, it spelled impending defeat. As Patrick's mind conjured images of the knights trapped, hunted, the worst-case scenario became starkly clear. I refuse! Desperation turned to rage, unleashing a whirlwind slash. However, boom. Patrick's sword was thwarted once more as 2 more knights intercepted him with a great sword and spear respectively. Baron, you'll be entertaining us. The first knight too, wiping the blood from his chin, unsheathed his long sword. Realizing his peril, a cold shiver ran down Patrick's inflamed mind. The words of the knight with the shield echoed again. So it is you 3 who were prepared for me? Patrick's voice was icy, instability creeping in. How do you like it? The original knight jeered with a sly smirk. Patrick glared back. An upper-ranked knight, to think there was one. Despite the immaturity, it was no doubt an upper-tier knight. That explained how he could withstand Patrick's charge. Now, understanding why Hamar Teslan was so boldly unworried, the realization came far too painfully late. The other 3 are at least mid-rank knights. Despair shadowed Patrick's face beneath his helm. If I'm blocked, the knightly order is too, and if they are. Outnumbered as they were, the main forces would be overwhelmed. With the image of the knightly order falling victim to a pincer attack, a ghastly ordeal, Patrick felt his spirits sink. I cannot allow it. Seething from the despair, he swung his blade with vehement anger, but, bong, the enemy was no pushover.
Regressor of the Fallen Family, Chapter 23. Chapter 23. The Lord has been blocked. Beside Patrick, the knight Heinkel, who was charging forward, widened his eyes in surprise at the unexpected sight. It was not important that his charge had seriously injured one of the enemy knights. To penetrate the enemy lines, which were twice their number, the presence of the head of the family was essential. To advance in this situation would be nothing but a suicide mission. He gritted his teeth, turned his horse around, and attacked another knight. But even that was not easy. Clang! The moment his attack was blocked, he saw 2 enemy knights closing in on him from both sides. The rest of the knights were in a similar situation. Shift to defensive stance. Stay close together. The opportunity will come. There were no knights among the enemies who could block their lord. They would definitely find a breakthrough. It was a command based on that sole expectation, but soon after, an unbelievable scene unfolded before his eyes as 5 of the enemy knights pressured their lord. The worst possible future he didn't even want to think about appeared before Heinkel's eyes. Are we losing in this war? With a sense of impending defeat clouding his mind, the aged knight Heinkel had to battle his own despair first. The process of the knights being pushed back was clearly visible to the infantrymen following behind. Even if they could not see each individual knight's movements, it was clear that their side's charge was blocked and the entire formation was being pushed back. The steps of the soldiers grew heavy without them realizing. Gradually, the madness of the battlefield died down, only to be replaced by creeping fear. And Patrick was falling behind the most. Working within the manor as much as he did, he knew the situation of the war better than the average soldier, and the more he realized, the more terrifying it got. If the head of the family gets blocked, we will definitely lose. Naturally, his footsteps grew even heavier, and that's when something happened that chilled him to the bone. Pat-a-pat-a-pat. Ah! Argh! Gurk! Suddenly, the soldiers marching in front of Rick collapsed in unison. A surprise shower of arrows. An arrow fell right in front of Rick's nose. He felt a shiver run down his spine, thinking about how, if he had taken just one more step, that arrow would have pierced his head. Frozen by fear that seized his whole body, Rick was pushed forward involuntarily by the movement of his allies from behind. No. His tongue was paralyzed with fear, and even if it moved, there was nothing he could do. Looking around, he saw soldiers walking with steps as heavy as his, their faces pale with fear. Probably, his own face was not much different from theirs. No, no, no! Despite Rick's panicked mind, the infantrymen steadily advanced with fear clearly written on their faces. Moments later, they inevitably collided with the enemy at the front line. Clang, clang, boom. Amidst the cacophony of metallic sounds filling the battlefield, soldiers swung their weapons at each other in desperate combat. Die! You die first, you bastard! It was only for a moment that the front line forces clashed fiercely. Soon the McLean camp began to be pushed back gradually. Lowered morale, insufficient numbers of troops. It was a natural outcome given the unfavorable circumstances. And it wasn't long before this difference resulted in a massacre. The first line to break was, unfortunately, directly in front of Rick. Ah! My arm, my arm! Save me! The son of the baker, young John's arm was sliced off, and the shepherd Derek's heart was pierced through. Phelps, a tenant farmer, had his throat cleanly cut, though his expression was too contorted in pain to call it a peaceful death. Faces all too familiar to Rick fell to the ground, drenched in blood. And there were other familiar faces falling one after the other. Ah! As the front line collapsed and the sudden chaos ensued, Rick felt as if death was right before his eyes. Even as he screamed, his body froze in place, but then suddenly a spear thrust towards him. Ah! In a moment of survival instinct overpowering fear, he narrowly managed to evade. A spear cut through the air where his head had been just a moment ago. As he brushed the chills from his chest, the shaft of the spear had already struck Rick's head. Die. Thud. Irk! Above the tumbling Rick, an enemy soldier with a contorted face like a demon raised his spear. Ah! Thunk! Rick screamed and rolled aside just as the spear plunged into the ground. He managed to dodge once, but the onslaught didn't end there. Die! 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 Thump! Thump! Thump. Rick had no choice but to roll desperately to avoid death. Ah! Although he was sure he had never seen that face before, the man frenziedly drove down his spear as if they were sworn enemies, which made him feel resentful. Thunk! Just then, the enemy's spear stopped abruptly due to a slightly odd sound. Get up quickly! Take up your spear! An ally helped him up. The face looked somewhat familiar, but Rick's dazed mind couldn't recall who it was. One thing was certain. This person had saved him. He was the benefactor who had dealt with the madman. Thank you, thunk. But before he could even finish his gratitude, the benefactor was pierced through the neck. Yuk, yuk. The benefactor collapsed with a grotesque cry, clutching the arrow that had penetrated his neck, reaching out to Rick as if to blame him, which sent shivers down his spine. Eek! Rick let out a bizarre sound and collapsed to the ground. I must run. I have to escape. Overwhelmed by that one thought, he stumbled back and then suddenly took off running. But his flight didn't last long. Wah! Ah! Screams and shouts filled the area. Rick, who had just come to his senses, stood still as if spellbound and looked around with vacant eyes. Before he knew it, enemy soldiers had filled his field of vision. Surrounded? We're losing? Is this how I die? All of us? Even to his unstrategic eye, it looked like there was no chance of winning. No, I'm going to live. I'll survive. Despite the fear, Rick dove back into the ranks, looking perhaps for some respite toward the rear. But then, wah! Charge. Behind Rick, cavalrymen who had circled around the battlefield were already slaughtering the rear soldiers. Ah! Behind! It's the enemy! The charge from above the horses cut down both spear and man, shattering bodies like toys. Oh, no, that's not supposed to happen. Cornered and without an escape, Rick's legs shook like quivering aspen. Arr! The sound of two great swords colliding was too deafening to believe it came from mere metal. Of the two who caused this roar, one staggered while the other immediately lunged at his foe. However, Patrick, the victor of this clash, did not look pleased because he foresaw what would come next, a sequence he had grown all too familiar with. Indeed, as soon the staggering enemy began to recover, a spear and a longsword leapt out from either side. Then, attacks from two more came from his rear, aiming at him with a longsword and a short spear, forcing Patrick to give up the chance he had almost secured. Damn you! Have you no pride as knights? Patrick screamed, but he knew all too well that what he was saying was pointless. The enemy's response was nothing but ridicule. What are you blabbering about? Ignore him. It's just a desperate struggle before death. You bastards! Even so, against an experienced high-grade Keniek. As Patrick brandished his sword with desperate rage in his bloodshot eyes, he aimed for an opening. Quang! But while his sword strike was intercepted by one of the skilled men, the others lunged at him from all sides. Sk! Another superficial wound was added to his collection. It was the same pattern repeated, yet Patrick had no way out. Clash, clash, boom. The relentless assault turned like gears in an endless cycle. It was clear these men had trained together intensively to coordinate against a stronger foe. No, they had been trained from the start to capture Patrick. Persistent bastards. As he muttered with a growling voice, a way out from this trap seemed non-existent. Even if I escape, it's already too late. The Knights of McLean, though vastly outnumbered, were just managing to hold their ground, but the regular infantry were overwhelmingly outmatched. The cavalry in the rear attempted to outflank the enemy, but the enemy cavalry had not only done the same, but were already on the attack. The pained cries of soldiers, or rather of his fief's people, pierced Patrick's heart like daggers. A lump formed in his throat. No matter how much he racked his brain, he could not think of a viable solution. The feeble willpower that he managed to muster amidst despair was quickly undeterred by his increasing injuries and the groans of his comrades engulfing the battlefield. His wavering heart ushered cowardly thoughts. That's right, Logan, you fled well. At least preserve the lineage of our family. The Baron's getting tired. Let's finish him. A fleeting thought had brought about injury. These fiends. Crunch. As the feeling of despair invaded his mind, what was left was stubborn defiance. Patrick grasped his sword for perhaps the last time as he ignited his vestige of fighting spirit, but then a sound threatening to break even that slender hope reached his ears. Thud, 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 thud. Cavalry? The sound of horse hooves from the enemy force's tail end charging towards him resounded through the earth. Though not numerous, the sound was enough to dampen his final spirit of resistance. Did they have more forces? But then, a sight he could hardly believe made Patrick doubt his eyes. Pat-a-pat-a-pat. The enemy's rear was thrown into disarray by the cavalry that recklessly tore through it, along with the horses that toppled. Our allies? As Patrick saw a young man with red hair fluttering in the lead of the cavalry brigade, similar to his own. Logan! In Patrick's wavering vision, an unbelievable scene was unfolding. In the forest behind the battlefield. Shortly after Teslan's army had passed, a few hundred cavalrymen who had followed the mountain path to the enemy's rear had been hiding with perfect timing. Despite being silent as death, concealed in the wood, the start of the battle had them whisper softly. Not yet, wait. Watching his father, Patrick McLean's attack being blocked and grimacing in frustration, Logan still firmly commanded. Like this. Did he fall to those wretches? Information from his past life surfaced, stirring his emotions, but it was still not the time. Logan remained coldly focused, controlling himself as he kept a close eye on the situation. Even as the knights were pushed back, quickly surrounded and outnumbered, he maintained his composure. Sir Logan, should we attack now? No, not yet. While a small number of knights were unable to hold as they should, this was apparent when a lower-ranked knight had his charging lance miss and was hit from both sides by 2 spears. That grub. Damn it. He had been one of the few knights who had recently begun to cozy up to him. The image of the man giving him a water bottle with a smile was still fresh in Logan's mind. Sir Logan, are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. Despite his voice seething with suppressed fury, sounding anything but fine, Kai remained silent, his trust in his young employer's tactical sense solidified by their successful ambush. But as the infantry clashed and the lines broke, he had to speak up once more. Sir Logan, even now, isn't it the time? Not yet, not yet. Blood dribbled down from Logan's tightly clenched lips. He, too, was filled with desire to charge at any moment, maintaining his sanity with such grueling self-control. Even if it were faces of strangers, the sight would have been painful, but many of the falling soldiers were familiar. The gardener Cobb, who helped them maintain at least a modicum of noble dignity in their barren fiefdom, fell with an arrow through his eye. Leo, the servant who had just begun to greet him with a smile, saw Cobb fall and dodged in alarm, only to have his throat cut by an enemy blade and collapsed. The perspective granted by his post-haste ability made the sight all the more piercing and agonizing. Logan forcibly averted his gaze from the hellscape, concentrating on the movements of the targets he had identified. Not yet. Is it still not time? Waiting any longer risked the possibility that, even if they won the war, his house's power would be far from intact. As Logan's dilemma deepened, his awaited target, the enemy's cavalry, finally reached the location he had anticipated. The screams from the rear of their troops acted as the signal. Now! Unleashing the fury he had contained, Logan spurred his horse forward. Finally, over 300 cavalrymen thundered from the forest, surging toward the battlefield. Regressor of the Fallen Family. Chapter 24. It's nearly over. Hamon Teslan smiled as the battlefield unfolded just as expected. The overwhelming difference in troop numbers, combined with the strategies that had been meticulously prepared, everything aligned perfectly. Among them, the highlight was undoubtedly the presence of the high-grade knight Raoul, who successfully blocked Patrick McLean. I did well not to announce it. Whether a high-grade knight exists or how many are there, that was the greatest standard that divided an order of medium-ranking knights from high-grade knights. In the current era, the military power of the nobility was measured by the number of knights in their ranks. The presence of a high-grade knight was directly linked to the prestige of a noble, and while ordinary lords boasted instead of hiding, they usually did not bother to conceal their presence. But it's better to hide them for times like this. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he watched the knights pushing Patrick McLean back. Then he saw the infantry's encirclement taking shape and the cavalry seizing the enemy's rear, and he clenched his fist tightly. Moreover, the enemy infantry was completely trapped by the interference of the allied archers. It's finished! Hamon Teslan was certain of the war's victory. Now just need to smash Patrick and conquer the McLean castle. After that, nothing else is needed. As he indulged in this comfortable and blissful imagination for a moment, an unusual noise came from the rear. Thump, 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 thump. Cavalry has appeared in the rear, about 300 horsemen. Cavalry? Did the McLean household have more elites? It was natural for the Count to think that way. In the current era, cavalrymen, who usually underwent knight training, were a high-end military unit. In fact, aside from the order of knights or even rarer mages, they were the elite of the elite. But they're not wearing full plate armor. They don't have lances either. Wearing leather armor, the only weapon they have is a small crossbow, and they're loaded with wooden boxes. They don't seem like regular McLean troops. Crossbows? Is that the weapon used by hunters? With that remark, the Count scoffed, shedding any tension. Order a portion of the rear troops and archers to shoot them down. If they're not elite troops, they're just rabble. The Count gave a logical instruction, and his deputy accepted it as a matter of course. But shortly after, the Count witnessed a scene that shattered his common sense. Ratatat. Ah! With spread screams, dozens, no, close to hundreds of soldiers were dropping like flies. What on earth is that? Damn it, stop them. Stop those damn bastards right now. The war he thought was already decided started to flow in an unexpected direction. The mercenaries dashed out swiftly. Nothing stood in their way. They spotted something being prepared by the enemies, but by now the distance had already closed significantly. I'll kill you all, damn rats. The distance between the enemy's rear and the mercenaries was about 400 meters. With a war bow, which was a standard among archers, even with the best firing angle, that distance was beyond the range of a parabolic shot. However, there was no hesitation in Logan's command. Fear, cha-cha-chuck. Every mercenary moved in unison, aiming at the enemy. Fire! Logan's crossbow fired first. The bolt, gleaming with a faint golden hue, penetrated the head of the rearmost soldier. Hundreds of bolts poured out like a storm after, turning Teslan soldiers into a beehive. Ah! What is this? What's flying at us? From that distance, something unexpected that flew in, piercing the bodies of their comrades mercilessly. The few soldiers who survived turned pale. It must be magic. The scream of someone confused by the unidentified attack caused even more chaos in the Teslan camp. Magician ambush in the rear! It was a ridiculous mistake, but the ensuing motion of the enemies only amplified the mistake. Thump, 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 thump. Line charge! Nay. The mercenaries who were plunging toward the rear sharply turned right, heading towards the north. Aim for the archers first! At the command, the mercenaries aimed their crossbows to the left. Squick. 314 repeating crossbows aimed in unison at their respective targets. Kill them all! The long-suppressed anger erupted like a volcano, and the vengeance-packed crossbows rained down on the enemies. Bop-bop-bop-bop. Ah! Arrows! It's arrows! Counter! Counter fire! Shoot the bows! Desperate voices rang out, and the longbowmen shot their arrows into the air, but their hastily aimed shots felled no one, landing uselessly. Even if aimed well, it wouldn't matter. Logan's mercenaries maintained a distance of over 300 meters from the battlefield, crossing the north. While they crossed, they continued to rain down shot after shot at the enemy's rear. Under Kai's training, they skillfully maintained a distance the enemy arrows couldn't reach, all the while. "Run for it! Where to? Forward! Let's move forward! You're mad! There's a battlefield in front!" Without proper engagement, they were simply slaughtered. From the far rear, soldiers began deserting, breaking the formation, creating a current that swept across the battlefield. Even those clueless about the situation were swept up by the turmoil and began deserting. And the impact of their actions was immediate. "Cavalry! Redirect the cavalry! Catch them! If they fail to catch them, it'll be the end." Struggling to hold on to his wits in what felt like a nightmare, Hamon Teslan shouted. No matter how pressing the situation, he couldn't spare the knights. A fight between power users could end in an instant with a single gap shown. So for now, the best option was to redirect the cavalry assaulting the McLean camp's rear. The deputy beside him waved the flags frantically to send the signal, and soon the enemy's rear cavalry started breaking away from the formation and turning around. By all means, they must be annihilated. The deputy nodded furiously, waving the flags as if mad in place of sending the detailed commands, hoping at least the urgency would be conveyed. And the cavalry, at least in terms of speed, splendidly met that hope. "Hiya! Thump, 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 thump!" As the Teslan cavalry charged like the wind, their shining armor was each more flamboyant than the last, but lighter and thinner than that of a knight's, reducing their protective capability. However, the light armor reduced the burden on the horses, marking it as the best equipment for cavalry shock troopers. And now the benefits of light armor were being fully demonstrated by the Teslan cavalry. The time it took for them, who had been slaughtering the McLean troops at the rear of the battlefield, to wrap around and head for Logan's mercenaries was a mere 10 minutes. That's how agilely they moved. But even as a 1,000-strong force of Teslan cavalry closed in at a frightening speed, Logan didn't even blink an eye. Instead, he welcomed the enemies with a smile tinged with murderous intent. They've come of their own accord. Grit. Watching his pre-planned primary targets rushing to their own death, Logan ground his teeth. He'd waited until those silver flies got far enough away before even starting to crumble their rear. During that time, how many of his fellow countrymen had died? Logan was ready to unleash his accumulated rage upon them, multiplied several times over. "Now move to the side! Flank maneuver! Flank maneuver!" With a chant followed by a second voice, the mercenary squad sharply adjusted directions. The mercenaries, appearing to rush towards the battlefield, turned right to face the approaching enemy cavalry. At that moment, the incoming chargers drew out shields from behind their backs. Shields. The typical tactic to take down cavalry was to use a unit of archers. Those archers, to counter them, would standardly equip themselves with a kite shield, large enough to tuck into the forearm and cover over half of the upper body. Once they positioned the shields in front of them and slightly bending forward, their defense against frontal shots was solid. But Logan was unfazed by their formation. As expected, Logan gave an order with a smirk. "Aim slightly down. Slightly down. Aim for the horses." Though confused, the mercenaries followed Logan's command and soon realized his intent, grinning as cruelly as he did. "Fire!" With a sneer in his command, Logan gave the order and the bolts were released. Nay. A single volley saw dozens of frontline cavalrymen tumble from their horses. The cavalrymen following behind ended up flying through the air, tripped over their fallen comrades and mounts. Gasp! The shields might have been strong enough to block the bolts, but they couldn't protect the horses from the arrows. Moreover, if non-power users fell from their horses at full speed, the consequences were obvious. Crack! Either their necks snapped upon landing, or crush! They were ruthlessly trampled under the following horses' hooves. Logan coldly laughed at the spectacle before him. Idiots. Archery units that dealt with cavalry usually chose parabolic shots to maximize their range. If cavalry got within about 100 millimeters, the typical effective range of a warbow, it was certain their own unit would be wiped out before they could aim properly, so they preferred to shoot from afar. Naturally, cavalry's tactic against arrows was to angle their shields slightly above their heads, offering protection against downward striking arrows, covering both horse and rider. They likely never imagined dealing with arrows shot directly at them from a range beyond 300 meters. But Logan had no reason to give them any consideration. Keep firing. Aim for those who stand up even after falling off their horses. Among them, there were some almost as strong as knights, staggering to their feet after tumbling from their mounts and getting trampled by their peers. They were graciously given another round of bolt showers in appreciation of their resilience. Arr! As the front line of cavalry was decimated by 100 men and subsequent bolts further shattered their ranks, the rest could not maintain their column and scattered directionlessly. It was unclear if the command unit at the front was fully coordinated, as they were all floundering about without a clear direction. Horizontal charge! Watching the scattered enemies, Logan's horse charged diagonally, and the 300 mercenaries followed suit. Protect the horses! Barely holding the line, Teslan's cavalry again rushed straight at Logan and the mercenaries. This time, they shielded their heads and those of their horses, angling the shield slightly to preserve the horse's view while still guarding the vital parts of both rider and mount. It was a demonstration of their well-trained capability. However, Logan ordered without hesitation. Fire! Nay! Arg! Despite Teslan cavalry's response, the same tableau repeated as before. A shield of such size could just about protect the horse's head. The bolts mercilessly exploited the gap left unavoidably open. The formation crumbled, and as the area hit widened, almost 200 horses tumbled in place. Subsequently, a similar number of cavalry from behind took spills, and the mercenaries' onslaught did not cease. They kept firing bolts endlessly. It ends like this. The faces of the surviving cavalrymen darkened rapidly. In that short charge towards the enemy, almost half of their troops vanished. As the absurd deaths of their comrades continued, fear began to overshadow their anger. But it was too late to turn back now. The remaining cavalrymen bit down and charged at the mercenaries, but fire! The enemy's crossbows, with astounding speed, unleashed more lightning bolts. Ah! This time Teslan's cavalry was reduced to fewer than the mercenaries. From then on, the mercenaries did not target those who fell. They merely continued to pelt down the remaining horses. The few survivors finally halted their charge and retreated, looking on in despair. Teslan's cavalry had already disintegrated. The cavalry that had once swept the fields like the wind had now vanished, just as insubstantial. Of course, some were not yet satisfied. Young Lord Logan, some who get up even after falling must be quite powerful, if we leave them be. Let them go! It's better to use that time to save even a few of my soldiers, the people of my land. Logan's mind was firm. What's that? What on earth are those guys saying? No one responded to the exclamation, which sounded like cursing. A chilling sensation ran down the spine. Everyone present felt that the atmosphere on the battlefield had completely changed. However, the lord of the camp found it difficult to accept reality. Our rear is being pierced. Soldiers are fleeing! At this rate, those guys might even. Don't talk nonsense. Knights wouldn't fall to something like crossbows. Haman Teslan was certain of that. Turn the knights around. The enemy knights aren't the problem. We need to deal with those guys first. It was a belated order, and even if the order was given, there was no way the enemy knights would simply let them go. At the moment when the subordinate, who had to convey the almost suicidal order, weakly raised the flag, there was a scream-like cry. They're moving this way. What? In response to the lieutenant's frantic shout, chaos filled the mind of the Lord Jajak. Move the knights to intercept them. No, before that, if I'm in danger. After a brief internal struggle, Jajak tactically chose the worst option. Lower the flag, hide among the soldiers, secure an escape route. Survival came first. Even as he practically gave up on the war, Haman Teslan busied himself with rationalizing his actions. From that moment on, the Teslan camp began to collapse mercilessly.